and welcome to Tea Talks with Christine and Katherine. I am Christine, teen librarian at MTPL Library in Middletown, New Jersey, and with me is...
Hi, I'm Katherine. I'm a reference and technology librarian here at MTPL.
Now, this time we are going to be talking about Cursed by Thomas Wheeler and illustrated by Frank Miller. As you can see, that we have two different covers here because this was made into a Netflix series. I have the show cover and Katherine has the original cover. And this book is the tale of the sword Excalibur and the Lady of the Lake and their origins. So it's a little bit of a twist on the Arthur legend. And I guess we'll start off with what did you think? We've also both watched the show, so we will be talking about both the show and the book and giving opinions on that. And before any real major spoilers come up, we'll let you know. So if you don't want to have the fun spoiled, you know to turn the video off. So Katherine, your thoughts?
So are we talking about the book first or the show?
Let's start with the book.
Okay, so I did like the book a lot. It actually was a very easy read. So if you really want an easy read and you kind of like Arthurian legends, I do think this is for you.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I will say that I didn't like about it, just in comparison, like there are some changes that I think the Netflix show did better, but that's kind of the point of a show, is to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
Like a few things I just didn't like. The usual I'm the main character syndrome. Like we just don't hear a lot about like the main character, like Nimue. I feel like her personality was just kind of it's okay, it's unfortunately the book suffers the same opinion that I have about the show, is some characters are more interesting than others,
and some characters are more kind of flat and undeveloped.
Right. Yeah, and like Nimue and Arthur, who are supposed to be like the crux of the show, I'm very bored by. And Merlin in the books, I felt more and in the show they improve him quite a bit.
And I think the actor who portrayed him did an excellent job. When we meet Merlin, he's not at his peak, shall we say. He's kind of down in a little bit of a slump, and this kind of shows how he kind of comes out of that. And I just think he did a really nice job portraying him. I agree with you. In the book, you didn't really learn too much more about him. You learned a couple of little things, but
yeah,
if you've seen the show, you pretty much knew everything there was to know about Merlin. And same with Arthur and Nimue too. You really didn't learn anything more about them.
No.
Arthur as our, future one true king, I'm not too impressed.
That's the thing. I'm not really impressed. And some part of this book's like worked really well for me and others didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think it was just, I would give it an okay rating for me. It's very easy. There's not too much to be impressed by. I think actually the show takes it though and does it better. I hate to say that.
Mm-hmm.
Because normally we, as librarians, we always have to go by the book is better, blah, blah, blah.
I think they did a pretty good accurate covering of the book to the show. As a matter of fact, in the very beginning of the book, I'm like reading through it, saying, "Oh, it's the same, it's the same, it's the same." And then I'm going to say about a third of the way in, it was like, "Oh, this is major difference," which we will talk about in the spoilers.
Yes.
And there were bits and pieces of it that I kind of liked in the show better, and parts that I liked better. I wish they had stuck to the book with that major difference. I preferred getting the Lancelot reveal in the show as opposed to the book.
Is that a spoiler?
I don't think so. Like, because there were all the characters in your standard Arthur legend are here.
Right.
Obviously, there's Arthur. There's his sister. In the show, they go by the name Morgana. In the book, it's spelled Morgan, but it can be pronounced Morgane. So those are our two names for his half-sister. We do have a Lancelot. We do have a Percival. We do have Sir Gawain. Well, Gawain. Uther is in both. Merlin, obviously.
Right.
Nimue being the Lady of the Lake. So we do have all the standard characters. It's when you kind of find out who they are and what
Yeah.
part they play that kind of differs a little bit. So,
And I want to ask you, so there's art in this book, like, because
yes,
Frank Miller is a big comic book guy. Like, for those who don't know, he did Sin City and a bunch of other like comics out there. I, however, am not. I want to ask your opinion about this. I'm not a huge fan of the art, I have to
I
say.
wasn't the biggest fan. We'll give you guys a kind of a sampling. We have some
Mhm.
some color art, and then we have
Some black and white.
some black and white, some 2-page spreads such as this, and then some single page. Um, I was not a big fan of the art myself. I I found it difficult to figure out who each character was. Um, it didn't add anything to the book for me. It did not distract me anything. It was one of those. Like I said, I really didn't. Wasn't a big fan of the art. This copy of the book, as far as just the physics of the book, it's a very heavy book. It's
Mm-hmm.
very heavyweight paper. That might have to do with those illustrations, but it's definitely printed on a high quality heavy paper. This is not a light book. It's a light read. I do agree with you on that, but the book itself is heavy. It was an easy read. It was and I found it to be enjoyable, and I found the show to be enjoyable too.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the acting, left a little to be desired. Could have gone a little less one tone.
We'll talk about that more in the spoiler corner.
Yeah. But overall, especially if you are a fan of the Arthur legend or any of the kind of variants on it, I would recommend both the show and the book.
Right. I
Yeah.
agree, same, like, because there are some differences in the book that I do think making it like a required reading, kind of like supplemental if you watch the show first and then want to read it. I will say
Mhm.
there's a lot of like interesting changes that the book just takes that the
Yeah.
show doesn't. And then the show adds actually something interesting that we'll talk about later in terms of like the convent and everything that
Yes.
we just don't see in the book that adds. So there's a reason for its existence. Because sometimes I'm like, why are they making this? We got everything in the book. And then I like it that they added to it. What's both interesting to me is like the book came out around the same time as the Netflix show. So I kind of like that this isn't
Mhm.
like an older book and that Netflix is in like an adaptation years later.
Right. And Frank Miller also wrote some of the screenplay.
Yes. So that
Not
was
Frank
actually
Miller,
very
excuse me,
interesting.
Thomas Wheeler. Thomas Wheeler.
Yes, no,
uh,
he did, but also Frank Miller helped write the screenplay too.
So that I think helped keep it true to the book as well. Um, it was almost kind of like they were working on the projects at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
The book came out, like you said, only about a month or two before the actual show itself.
Yeah, I thought that
So,
was interesting because normally you wait like years for
yes.
another like show to come out. Like our review for 2 weeks from now is the Umbrella Academy. That
Mhm.
comics have been around for a while, and only recently did they make that into a show.
Yeah. So, and
So I
now
wonder
we'll,
if that was like always a little bit intended. And I did read there's like a little bit of a description in the back, and it seems like
Mhm.
it was
I
intended.
got the same impression that they
Mhm.
did intend to turn it into a Netflix series very quickly. Um, and also, it appears there will be a part two, which I'm
Yes.
kind of happy about. Both for the book and for the show. I'm like really interested to see what happens next to our band of players, so to
Yeah,
speak.
I agree. There's some characters that I want to see more backstory about, and there's some
Yeah.
characters that honestly, unfortunately for me, I could kind of care less about. Like, unfortunately, the two main leads, they're just not my favorite, but I know they're the ones driving the story.
Yes.
But and unfortunately, they're not as interesting. But like Lancelot and Percival are very interesting, and I want to see where they go. And the whole thing
Yes.
with the Red Paladins, I want to see where that goes. Everything else, unfortunately, could take like a back seat for me.
So I guess we're kind of starting to stray into spoiler territory. So if you wish to continue, we will be starting to reveal some plot points that we both enjoyed and did not enjoy.
Yes. So this would be the time that we're heading to spoiler corner. But before we do that, did we just want to give an overall rating on the book before giving our end review?
Give it an overall 4 out of 5 for me. I
I
enjoyed it. It was a nice summer read. It falls well into the kinds of fantasy I like. I would recommend, I'm going to show somebody else. Okay, so this was one of my first fantasy books I ever read, The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley. And it is the Arthur story told from the viewpoint of the women in his life. Guinevere, the Lady of the Lake, and Morgane. So I was kind of thrilled to see this version as well. So I would go 4 out of 5. Yourself?
So I think for the book, I'm going to rate it like a 3.5 for me because
Okay.
I still enjoyed it, but there's just some aspects of it for me that I didn't like some of the drawings and some of the characters I felt were weaker. I mean, I still enjoyed it. It was a very easy read,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes you kind of need an easy read, and
Yeah.
I like that. For the show, I'm going to go give that a 4.5. I'm going to rate that a little higher than this because I just think they made better changes.
Yeah, I can agree with you on that for the show.
Mhm.
Um,
I think,
4.5 sounds right. Yes. And
yeah.
I would recommend doing both.
I agree for reading both. Like, I don't know which order because I saw the show first and then I read, and I enjoyed that. So really,
Yeah,
it doesn't matter which order you decide to do
exactly.
it.
As long as you know that either way, you're going to get a pretty um, similar story. You know, whether you watch it first or read it first. So
Pretty
the stories
much.
are pretty much the same, and it's nice to see um, the visual take, what people put visually to it.
hmm
Because did you notice there really wasn't too much description of some of the characters in the book?
No, there really wasn't like that very much. Like, they gave you very like brief like descriptions of things, and I think that's just Tom Wheeler's writing style.
Like
Really,
even
like, he just seems to like describe things like very simply, which I do like because unlike George R. R. Martin or someone
yeah,
comparatively, their descriptions take years like to like go into and follow up on. So it's just nice to be like, she was wearing blue.
yeah. The Fae, all those different clans of the Fae, you know, they were tall with arms that helped them climb
Yeah,
mountains. Yeah,
the
that's nice.
descriptions were just
Eh, you know, and to see the visual in the show
hmm
was much better for me. Like seeing the show first, I was able to kind of put that visual to these characters. I would have loved the illustrations to have better visual, you know, illustrations of those Fae, because all those different clans, that would have been amazing to
I
see.
know. And I think that's where the show, unfortunately, and the book falls flat for me is like, I know Frank Miller to be this great visual guy. I mean, his comic books are so detailed and beautiful. Like, Sin City is done in this gorgeous black and white. So I know
Mhm.
he can do it. It's just what happened in the show. I actually
Mm,
also found the drawings in the transition in the show to actually be very distracting. And I was like, why are they here? If I didn't know it was like a I don't know if we really call this a graphic novel because it
mhm.
just kind of has art in it with text.
It's
But
an illustrated novel, is about what
yeah,
I would call it. Yeah.
but when it showed up in the show, I was like, why is this here?
Mm.
I didn't really want it there. Like, it just
Yeah.
got distracting. And I was like, is this a transition scene that I'm supposed to like? It's just not a style choice that I thought was good for the show.
I think it was meant to be that transition, like you're talking between scenes or characters, and I didn't much like it.
Right.
You
And
know,
there's just like little things that also I didn't like. Like, as you said, in the books, the one character's name is Morgan, and in the show it's Morgana. And I'm like,
mhm,
why are we changing her name all of a sudden? I mean, I know she's technically in the Arthurian legends, and you know this, about this more than I do. So
yeah,
tell me if that is wrong or not.
she will. She does play a very key part in the legend in his when he becomes a king. So we might look more to see the part she starts to play in book 2.
hmm
Um, I don't want to spoil for anyone who doesn't know the
I mean,
legend,
I think
but
at this point, should we then switch to spoiler territory?
we're definitely in spoiler territory.
I already thought we
Um,
were. I was like, aren't we?
aren't we? So, for instance, let's go with Morgana. I prefer that name for her, so that's the one we're going to
Yes.
use, which is the one they use in the movie. Again, I call it a movie. I binged watched all episodes, so for me, it was a very long movie. Um, it's a series. So the series. In the series, she is his full sister.
Mm-hmm.
In legend, she is his half sister. In the book, she is his half sister. Um, uh, Unless by omission, we just were led to believe she was his full sister in the show. I don't know, but they did kind of make it clear that they were half siblings in the book,
Right.
which is true to the legend. They don't necessarily get along very well, which they didn't get along well in either one. She did not have a very high opinion of Arthur, same as we. he's
Yes.
he was kind of a boring character, I thought.
Me, and I didn't think the actor who played him did him any service in making him interesting. Like, not to
No,
pick on these actors, but like him and Katherine Langford, unfortunately, I just don't think they did a great job at
no.
these characters.
I would
I
have
didn't really
loved
like
a
the way they
much better
did.
Nimue.
Yeah. The book Nimue was way more interesting. And then this Netflix Nimue, I'm sorry. I just like when Katherine Langford was on scene, not to pick on her or anything, but she just didn't bring anything to this role, like
No.
whatsoever. I just found her really boring. And I've seen her in other things, like 13 Reasons Why. I've watched a bunch of her stuff. She was actually
Mhm.
almost supposed to be Iron Man's daughter, but that fell through.
Mm.
But I just didn't think she brought anything to this role. I was so bored. And the characters I wanted more of, I wanted more of Lancelot. I wanted more
Yes.
of Percival. Unfortunately, it's the same thing I have with the book where I just thought they were more interesting. Why can't we go with them? Why are we following her? I'm bored. And I know that's the whole
Yes.
point is to be like, oh, this is a feminine version of the King Arthur legend, but like the girl isn't that interesting.
No, she's not. And in the Mists of Avalon series, the
Mm-hmm.
Lady of the Lake origin story and which is the Nimue character was just so much better. I was like really looking for so much more. Um I wanted to know more about the culture and the history of the Fae and this war over the swords and um more of Merlin's background interacting. Why did the Fae hate him? What happened to drive him to Uther? I didn't
Right.
really care too much about Arthur's backstory.
Well, I definitely think though the
I,
show does a better like description of like Merlin's like background
yeah.
and like all the description of like why the Fae hated him, what did he do? Like the show did it better. Like book Merlin to me was boring, but then
Mhm.
show Merlin is like, hello, I'm here for this.
Uh, um, one of my favorite lines though from both the book and the movie, the show. I'm so glad they put it in the show. Was a Merlin rotting is a Merlin plotting.
Yes.
Loved that line. Don't know why, but it also kind of gave you an inkling that don't dismiss him. When this book starts, he doesn't have his magic, so his magic is all gone, which has made him a rather angry sot,
He's
drunken
also
sot.
like drunk half the time in the
Exactly.
show. So that's also just kind of like he's our comedic person to follow.
But that one little line kind of led me to believe like, oh, we're going to be seeing some more from him. Don't dismiss because he doesn't have his magic. And he did come, I guess he came forward and saved the day, got his magic back at the end. Yay.
Yeah,
So
so I'm happy. Honestly, like that's what made me the happiest. I'm like, yay! Like, so spoiler, I guess, to the end. But
I'm
Nimue, should we reveal the end already, or
well, we know Nimue becomes the lady in the lake. The lady in the lake.
literally?
Yes, literally. And in legend, she is literally in the lake.
I mean,
Nimue
yeah, the
doesn't quite make it. Well, we're not quite sure if I wasn't quite sure if she was completely gone
no,
or
we're not sure, but that's the point of see you
it's,
next time on
it
Netflix.
seems like she might be.
But yeah, this is
Um,
like literally the end image of the book. Is like
yeah.
her in the lake. So she does become the lady of the lake. And I hope you're more interesting being a lady in the lake than you are as a person. Not to be
Yes.
mean to her, but I'm just like, oh, she's so boring. And Arthur gets his magic back, and I'm like, this is
Not
everything.
Arthur, Merlin.
Oh, sorry, Merlin gets his magic.
So I'm hoping he becomes even more interesting too.
Oh, Arthur or Merlin?
Merlin.
Oh, yes. I hope Arthur, however, just goes into another story. I
So
don't want him in here anymore. I'm bored by him too.
yeah. The major difference between the book and the show, the convent that you mentioned,
Yes.
when Arthur's trying to protect Nimue. So we have the whole Red Paladin, who are the soldiers for God, I guess. They're an order of monks who are set on wiping out all the fae or fairy folk, of which Nimue is one. And when she sees her village destroyed, she's you feel she's the only survivor. There are others who survive later on. You find out further along the way. And Arthur, to save her, brings her to his sister. So in the show, his sister is in a convent.
Mm-hmm.
And she's known as Sister Igraine, which is their mother's name. And actually, after, according to legend, after Arthur is born and then he's apprenticed out to Sir Ector, I believe it is. However, she winds up going into a convent. She does wind up marrying Uther, and when Uther died, she winds up in a convent. So I kind of, at first I was thinking, oh, we're going to meet his mother, but we met his sister. So I liked that they added that component. In the book, she's what, a waitress in a tavern or something?
Yeah, in the book, she's a waitress in a tavern, and then they bring her to hers. We don't meet her in the convent, but they did say she was previously in a convent,
Yes.
so they do allude to that. So that is mentioned, but we don't see her in the convent. And yeah, she's just a waitress. And then they go on their, I guess, like adventures together.
I kind of liked the convent bringing in. I liked, it was a better, for me, introduction of Sister, is Iris?
Is Sister Iris, yeah, who becomes very interesting later. We will talk more about her later.
Yeah, I liked that introduction to her a little bit better than in the book. And the way she just always wanted to be one of the Red Paladin, and she was told she couldn't be because she's a girl, which to me was in keeping with that time period. I wasn't such a big fan of some of the relationships with Morgana. Yeah, they had her and another sister in the convent, were a couple, and they were keeping it hidden and clandestine. And when she took off, well, the whole convent got burned when she escaped.
Right.
And that led into this whole arc with Morgana in terms of, at one point in the book, dark forces start enticing her to want the sword for herself, to get a hold of the sword. She starts becoming a witch, which becomes a witch. In the true legend, she is Merlin's disciple. So I think we are going to see that in the second book. I did kind of like a little bit how the book showed that she was a little bit knowledgeable about the herbs and the roots and
she's very feisty. She's a go-getter. She has no nonsense for her, or for she also doesn't like how Nimue gets distracted by other men, which we'll talk about her relationship to Arthur later. Spoiler, it's very boring, but we'll talk about that. But I see her point, like she's very driven. She knows what she wants, and I think that leads to some of her like darker actions in the show. In the book, she's kind of more one note. She's very, this is what we must do, and here's how we're going to do it.
And you need to keep the sword, and you need to become the queen, and you can't give this over, and you need to take this
can't date other men, and blah blah blah
blah blah blah.
And I liked her. Okay, mom.
I liked her character in the show better. The only aspect in the book I liked is I liked that they didn't have her be cursed. If they had removed that part of her character in the show, I would have been 100% satisfied. I think.
I think her wanting to be dark a little is just a very bizarre into her compared to her other character, because like she's very good and she's very loyal to Nimue like pretty much right away. Like that's a little bit weird to me.
That was weird. Yes.
Yeah, and I just thought that was bizarre, but I liked seeing her in the convent with the girlfriend, and that was very interesting. But I don't like the dark tone that it kind of like took. Like eventually, like the girlfriend, spoiler, well, we're in spoiler corner, but like spoiler, she dies in the fire because Sister Iris literally sets the convent on fire.
Yeah.
And she dies, and eventually she's seeing like the ghost of her, like I guess like dead lover, like,
Yes.
and eventually she's like, oh, if you become like like she goes like basically like if you get the sword and take it for yourself, you could accomplish more than Nimue ever could. So she gets enticed by this darkness, and there was something, I don't know who was it that was enticing her. It was some sort of like spider
Some sort
figure,
of spider.
some sort of
Yep.
spider, and then she eats a spider, and it's just weird. And then she goes into like this trance almost. It's like it's not herself. And then eventually, towards the end of the series, like Death is supposed to kill Nimue. There was some subplot where like Death is supposed to kill Nimue, and then it rushes to her killing Death, and now Morgana is Death.
Yeah. I didn't like that part of it. Personally, I liked, Death the Widow, just being Death the Widow.
Yeah, and that was very cool. Like her backstory, like the widow's backstory was cool.
Yeah.
And she got along with Merlin, and like I kind of thought maybe they had this romantic relationship in some way. Like it seemed like they had like a deep like understanding of their relationship to each other. But
Yeah.
and then her plot got confusing though. Like Death was supposed to kill Nimue for some reason. We don't really know why.
I think it wasn't that because it was just that Nimue was slated to die and become Death. But it's never really explained in the show why.
Right.
It's just that I will be wearing her face. It's the next face, and that's fate, and you can't change it. And then the next thing we know, Morgana changed it, and now she's the face of Death.
Right. So that's very interesting. So I'm curious how that came to be, because they never went into that in the show because they were already in the end stages of their show.
Yeah.
So that's something I really want to see, because that's actually super interesting to me.
Yeah.
I know you and me had like problems with like Morgana's relationship a little bit, just because like it kind of came out of left field.
It felt like it was a kind of it was just like it felt to me like it was just thrown in there.
Yeah.
It wasn't, it didn't seem to develop out of the story. It was just like, like, here, let's just kind of toss this in, and almost a little forced. And I would have preferred either they had developed what their, how their relationship developed, given us a clue what got them so close, or just left it out.
Right. And maybe since the next part of the story is probably just going to involve her and Merlin for a little while, I'm hoping we explore both sides of their characters, because now
Yeah.
Merlin is powerful and now Morgana is powerful in a totally different way. So
Yes.
that's really what I want for season 2. Forget all the Nimue and Arthur subplots. I want Morgana and Merlin. I don't know why I keep saying Arthur. What's wrong with me?
Well, because Arthur obviously eventually, if we hold true to the tale, will be the one who wields the sword of the first kings, and he will be the one true king of all of England. So I am hoping his character develops better.
So should we then talk about their relationship a little bit more with Nimue?
Well, Nimue and Arthur fall in love. Oh, and then just as they fall in love, they get torn apart because, in order to save all of the Fae, her people, Nimue surrenders herself to Uther and the Red Paladin. We also have the Vikings coming in, who are
yes,
the Vikings play a major part in the show,
but not in here.
They're a background in this until the very end. The very, very end is when Arthur is leading the remnants of the Fae to safety.
Okay, well,
so Arthur's leading the remnants of the Fae off to safety. Uther's going to put them on ships and let them sail away and leave his kingdom, and that'll, solve the problem, so to speak. They get ambushed by the Vikings and the Red Paladin, who made the Ice King and the Red Paladin made an agreement. So they get ambushed, and then the daughter of the Ice King, who leads up the Red Spear, come
Mhm.
in and help Arthur and the Fae. So that all happens at the end. But there's other stuff that goes on in the show, like Pym. What happened to Pym?
Right, there was no mention of Pym in this. Like, Pym in the novels, she gets killed early by the Red
Well,
Paladins.
we don't see her die, so it is
Well, that's
quite
true. We don't see
possible.
her die.
Yeah, maybe she's going to come back in book 2, but in the series, you find out she did not die. She
Mhm.
winds up sailing off with this red spear, and it's because of her that they align with Nimue and the Fae.
Right.
That's
She
not
falls in
the reason.
love and things happen for her. And like,
Yes.
unfortunately, like her beau dies, but it's such a nice thing, like seeing her actually do some things. Whereas in the novel, we have no mention of her whatsoever.
Yeah,
So
after the
that's
first like
unfortunate.
second chapter, after the second or third chapter, she's just gone.
Oh, I
Never.
know. So that's unfortunate. I kind of hope they bring her back in book 2.
Yeah.
A funny part that the author mentioned at the end that Sister Iris is going to have an army of children, which I am so looking forward to that.
I want to see what that's going to be because she's
I I love that he mentioned that in the like his little like end chapter editorial thing, but like I laughed. He goes like Frank Miller said we should have her have an army of children, and I'm so doing that for book 2. So I
yes.
can't wait for that.
That is yeah, something I'm looking forward to too.
And speaking of the
oh,
Vikings, oh sorry, did you have?
oh, oh no, what I was just going to say is that in that battle, now in the show, Arthur meets the daughter, the leader of the Red Spear, and you're really not quite sure who she is, but you do find out in the book she's Guinevere. So
Guinevere.
he meets Guinevere, and
And
I kind of,
honestly, I am now team Arthur get together with Guinevere.
well, we know that's going to happen. Okay, he will
Okay,
get
well, I
together.
don't know Arthurian legends, so that's why you're here.
So he'll get together with Guinevere. She will become his queen, but according to Arthur legend, she really loves. She loves Arthur, but she loves Lancelot as well.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
So I'm really interested to see how that love triangle is going to play out because in this version, Lancelot is actually he is and again in Arthur legend he is supposedly raised by the Fae. There is some there debate on whether he's part Fae or not, but in the book he is a Fae.
Yeah.
And he's fighting for the Red Paladin, which is why they are so able to decimate and track down and kill all
Right.
the Fae people. You find out in the book, what was it, about halfway through?
Ah, see, that was what was super disappointing. So halfway through the book reveals that he's Lancelot. Because the guy who's the head Red Paladin goes, "Oh, my little Lancelot," and I'm like,
Yes,
"No!" In the
I
show, they
really
do it so
now
much
the show. It was like one of the last scenes when the Weeping Monk, which is what he's called throughout the entire series, and it is also his nickname in the book, and Squirrel, who is one of the other survivors from Nimue's village, Squirrel winds up helping the Weeping Knight at the end because Gawain appeals to the weeping monk and that you are Fae, we are all brothers, I will never turn you in, and he has a change of heart and he joins the Fae, and Squirrel helps him escape from the thing, and they're riding off, and he's like, he's saying to Squirrel, what's your name? He's like, I'm Squirrel, and he's like, well, no, that's not a name, what did your parents call you? And he's like, oh, it's Percival, but I don't like that name. And the minute I heard that, I'm like, yes, he's going to say, because then Squirrel says, and what's your name? I'm Lancelot. I was like, yeah, Lancelot and his Squire Percival.
Yes.
I liked the reveal at the end because throughout this whole series, I'm trying to figure out who is Lancelot. We knew who Arthur was.
Right.
We knew Nimue was going to be the Lady of the Lake. When they mentioned the Green Knight and we found out that was Gawain, I'm like, okay, I'm checking off boxes, who everybody is. And I wasn't sure who Lancelot was. And I'm kind of liking the Weeping Monk now, not just because he's
Wow.
Lancelot, but I I want to see him develop. Like
Right.
what made him follow the paladin? Why did he go this route? What happened to the rest of his people?
And honestly, for me, like he steals the show. Like he is the show. Like Lancelot's the reason to watch the show. So if you want to watch the show for one reason, I say it's for Lancelot. He's
Yeah,
so interesting, and like he's the first scene. Like I don't know if you recall, but like in the opening of the show, we see him and the guy who's like our big bad,
yeah.
like talking together, and he's like saying like he's talking to the kid, and all of a sudden you see the kid is magic because he puts his hand on, I think it's like a leaf, and then he
A leaf,
transforms into
right?
the color of the leaf, and he says, and we can't let you survive. So it looks like he is like, this guy is so bad. They're killing kids who are magical because they're religious, like fanatics, basically. Like they're just trying to kill like a whole like species off. So, and then later on, you find out that he saved that kid, like that kid from the beginning of the show. And it's Lancelot. And that's like so interesting. And he's like clearly tormented all throughout the show. He talks about how like he still has this great belief in God, and he's like, well, he goes, I can't see God anymore. Like he goes, I feel like his light is fading from me. So there's this big struggle in him to fight for his people and the one who's raised him, even though they're evil religious fanatics.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating. So that to me is like the crux of this. And I wanted more Lancelot. There's like this little bit of Lancelot.
He was such a I thought he was a very fascinating character. And if we go forward in the legend, him and Guinevere are supposed to fall in love, and that starts pulling the kingdom apart. So I'm like really looking forward to, like, this was a nice, laying foundation. You don't always get
Right.
that. Sometimes those first books or first, seasons, it's kind of like, oh hum, I got to get through this. But I'm
Yeah.
I think it was a nice setup.
They did it really well at building up these like core characters to
Hmm.
eventually see what they'll become, and it's so fascinating. So for that I really do want to like see in the future. So that was a big exciting one. Like
Yes.
one character who we haven't talked about, who I still kind of don't understand because he just has very little descriptions, is Uther Pendragon. I don't really, he kind of acts like he's 5 in every scene.
Yeah.
He's complaining and calling mom, and like I understand he's a big reveal, but he's just not that fascinating. Like Uther Pendragon is just another one of these characters who's after the sword of power, but he has a mom who is like very evil, and it's eventually revealed that like it's not actually his mom. She just kind of took him and like claimed him as her own.
Well, her husband died while she was pregnant,
Mm-hmm.
and since the queen could not rule the land, um, she was hoping her child would be a boy, and it was a boy, but it was stillborn.
Right.
So she bought a peasant's son who was just born, and that was Uther. So
Right.
she really didn't have any warm fuzzies for him. It was her way of making sure she stayed in power, ruling as the queen regent. So I'm thinking most of Uther's life, um, she was this domineering, in charge woman running things for him. Um, Definitely not the picture that I'm familiar with from Uther, with who Uther is. The interesting thing, which I was kind of glad they explained it in the book, he kept saying, we do not like this. Do not talk this way of us. And how dare you tell us to do this, when he was referring to himself. And I'm like, this
Right.
is is like he a little off or
Well,
something?
I don't know.
In the book, when Nimue meets at the very end of the book, when she meets with his ambassador, like trying to broker a surrender, she says she remembers that the kings in this land refer to themselves in the plural,
Hmm.
um, meaning that they are speaking for everyone. And she wondered if she should do the same, but she chose not to. And I was like, oh, finally somebody explained why he was talking that way. It was one line in the book, but it was something that bothered me every episode in the show and almost every chapter of this book.
See, that's interesting because I actually never noticed that he did that in the show. I just thought he talked weird because he was trying to be this like almost kind of like bigger than life figure.
Yes.
I don't know. He was just acting very like always kind of like almost kind of like quirky, and I just thought that was the direction that the actor received. I
Mhm.
didn't kind of like, but this is then when I read the book, I was like, no, this is just kind of the character that he's like outlandish. He honestly kind of reminds me of like Klaus a little bit from Umbrella Academy, which we're gonna be discussing next week. But like
Crazy.
he just kind of has these like quirky, bigger than life like feelings, and like he's just bizarre. And I was like, okay, here's our comedic relief on cue.
Mhm.
I don't know.
And
I just thought he was weird. I just every scene he was in, I was like, could you leave?
he didn't want to rule. Like he wanted to be the king, but he didn't want to have to be responsible and rule. Like he didn't want to have to deal with problems. Oh, the Red Paladin. Okay, yeah, they're not that much of a threat. Don't worry about them. Oh, the Vikings took that port. Well, and he kept wanting Merlin to take care of it. And
Right.
he didn't really. He wanted to be in charge, but he didn't want to really rule. Um,
I do
and
like, however, him eventually deciding to kind of become his own man
yes,
and eventually kill off his mom.
and
That
kills
was just
mom.
so satisfying.
That was really good. He
That scene, like his mom was like a complete evil because she's just like she wanted to rule everything, control everything, and she wanted to be the one that ruled, but she can't because she's a woman, and she had all this like what was so fitting was her death because she had this whole room of like poisonous trees, and he eventually kills her with the thing that she always creates is just poison.
poison. Mm-hmm.
So perfect, so wonderful. I hope he becomes a less like I'm like forgetting the word, but almost kind of like quirky and bigger than life and just like a normal person. I'm looking forward to that.
Unfortunately, he probably doesn't have much time with us because we have all the key players in place. We've met Guinevere, we've met Lancelot, we've met Arthur, we've met Merlin. Merlin and Morgana are they were whisked away together when he got his magic back. So I'm assuming he's going to begin her tutelage and teach her all of his mystical arts and so to speak. So we're really set for Uther to die
Oh,
and Arthur to step in, but maybe we'll see him around a little bit longer. There was that big battle at the camps right at the end, so we don't even really know what happened there.
right.
Um, when Nimue escaped and was shot down by Sister Iris.
Oh man. So yeah, then we should talk about her because she's our last topic for the day.
Yes.
So yeah, so Sister Iris is very fascinating because when we see her in the convict in the beginning, at least of the show,
Mm-hmm.
in the book, she's just already pretty much there and like doing the bidding of the Red Paladins because she wants to get further in that. She very much believes in their vision of not having any magical people.
Yep.
In the show, it's pretty much the same, except we see her early in the comic pretty much being a stickler for everything. She's just kind of like a stick in the mud there who like gets into people's business. She eventually finds about Morgana and her love interest, and she eventually tries to go after her for that.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty much later on, like she wants to get bigger in the Red Paladins, and at least like I don't want to spoil everything that she does, but like basically she's following Nimue to eventually like bring her to the Red Paladins. So her whole purpose is to eventually get bigger, and because she believes in a world where like people are pure, basically, like
Mm-hmm.
people are not magical. So she's completely one-track minded in kind of like a soldier's kind of way. So her main goal is to become heavier in the Red Paladins world, and eventually at the end she is promoted to the Ghost.
Um,
I think that's what they called her.
one of the Trinity Guard.
Right.
So goes from, she actually in the show skips over being a Red Paladin and becomes the Pope's um, guards. Becomes one
Oh,
of them
okay. Because yeah,
with the
in the book
golden
they refer
mask,
to
the
her as
golden death mask. So she just like kind of jumps ranks real quick.
the.
In the book, she is, when you first meet her, she is already with the Red Paladin. She was not in a convent. She was raised by one of the Shadow Kings, which is the whole magical um, people, which was odd that she wants to now wipe out the magic folk, but she was raised by them as a fighter. She's only 14, was it? I think believe she
Yeah, she's very, very
very
young. And in the
young.
show, she's also very, very young.
Yes. And but she's a great fighter, and it's her experience um as a fighter for the Shadow King. Basically, they would
Hmm.
she was in a fighting ring where they waged bets on who was going to be the winner. Um, she adapted to all kinds of weapons rather easily. It's ingrained in her that this kill or be killed, and then she wants to wipe out when she finds a purpose with being with the Red Paladin. She just uses all these killer skills to her advantage with them. And in the book as well, she winds up being promoted to the Trinity Guard, gets her death mask, which in the book I think has more significance because at one point she gets burnt quite horrifically.
Yes.
And that's where she becomes Ghost because she's always wearing this sack over her disfigured face, and they just call her the little ghost.
Okay,
And
yeah, because they mentioned the ghost thing pretty early on.
yeah,
And that's why when she sneaks up on you, you don't like hear her coming.
she's very quiet.
Mm-hmm. So she's
And
very like silent but deadly.
exactly. And either I liked the portrayal of her in the convent a little bit more, that
Right. I have
sneaking
to
up.
say, though, for me, she still is a very boring character as well, just because she's so one note. It's so just hard to get into her because there are great villains out there. She's just not one of them.
She's not a great villain. I'm hoping now, like with the army of little children that she's going to develop, we'll see.
So she definitely has potential to become more interesting because right now she's like very one note, and she was one note in the show, and it was very thrilling to see her eventually get promoted in the show because she eventually kind of involves Nimwe's downfall, where she basically like pushes her into the river.
Mm-hmm.
So she's kind of the catalyst for Nimue becoming the Lady in the Lake, and now she's becoming promoted within her own ranks. So it's kind of a nice, at least visually, because I'm a bit more of a film person, slash TV show person. It's kind of interesting to see like how she's like the dark way that Nimue could have been,
Mm-hmm.
and that they're kind of foils to each other and how they act. So that's very interesting to me.
Yeah. So we are just about out of time. I'm definitely looking forward to Cursed Part 2.
Yeah.
And we hope you enjoy too this book. I was not able to find a audio or e-copy of it, but
No, I wasn't either.
we have several copies here at the library. Feel free to come on in and check one out. And
I
definitely,
also recommend Frank Miller's other work if you want to read it. They're a little bit more violent, I have to say. Sin
mhm,
City is a bit more violent, but I do recommend them. And just to announce as well, for some reason we can't have comments on YouTube. I'm not really sure what the settings are. So I have actually now made us an email address.
awesome.
We are ttalksmtpl@gmail.com. If you want to email us a recommendation, any comments that you have, any suggestions, we'd be happy to read a few of them if you send any. So if anyone has any recommendations or comments for our format here, we'd love to read them.
Yes, definitely.
All right.
So,
So next
everyone,
time we're reviewing then the Umbrella Academy.
which is there are 2 seasons now currently on Netflix, and there are 2 volumes to the graphic novel series. One thing I know that Catherine, you did mention about the violence in with Cursed, with some of his graphic novels being violent. The violence does exist in the book, however, it's not very graphic in description.
Mm-hmm.
It might be a little bit graphic in the show. Just a
Right.
heads up.
So if you're a person that is bothered by a little bit of the graphic like content, the novel is not at all graphic. The show,
No.
however, is a little bit more, but not, I would say, much more, but it also depends upon how you feel. There's a
Yeah,
lot of sword fighting and you see blood.
exactly. So as long as you're prepared for that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now do we Born in the Dawn?
Born in the dawn to pass in the
Pass the
twilight.
twilight.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Hope
you,
you enjoyed
everyone.
that. Take care.
Take care.